Today I'm talking about a fantastic film from 2007. This film is from master auteur director Paul Thomas Anderson and is loosely based off the novel Oil by Upton Sinclair. The film is a great representation of a fantastic lead performance, and it rides on the heels of this performance. It's also got some incredible cinematography and a wonderful score by Johnny Greenwood. Talking about There Will Be Blood. There Will Be Blood is a film that rides so much on the performance of its leading actor, Daniel Day-Lewis. Daniel Day-Lewis is often considered one of the finest actors alive, and he's won multiple Academy Awards, 3 in fact, one for this film, one for the film Lincoln, and one for My Left Foot. And this is his between Oscar, his second Oscar, and is my favorite performance of his. The film opens with a fantastic opening montage or scene that is completely set in silence or without dialogue. There is some music underscoring and some sound, but no speaking happens for almost 15 minutes in the beginning of this film. What we get to see is Daniel Plainview, Daniel Day-Lewis's character, beginning his career as a man in search of deep wealth. And his ambition to further his wealth is what drives this character throughout the entire film. And this is a character arc that we've seen in so many other great characters. Most notably that I can think of is Citizen Kane. And in this film, we kind of get to start with him in the bottom and literally under the earth, like he's growing into the birth of this wonderful, larger-than-life guy. And he starts in the dirt and the grime, and he even at one point falls off his ladder and breaks his leg and severely hurts himself. But ultimately, at the end of this, we see that he finds what he's looking for, which I believe is some silver, and he is moving into the next bracket of success. What then follows is a fade into probably 8 to 9 years later after this opening scene, where he has transformed a bit and grown in stature and is now speaking to a group of people, and his ambition has now turned to oil. And he is speaking to a group of people in a small town about wanting to come and drill in their town. And we, in that first moment, see so much about this guy and growth that doesn't need to be explained. We see it completely visually. And what we then get is this wonderful monologue where we see how well-spoken and composed this man is, and the charm that seeps through him.
I do my own drilling. And the men that work for me, and they are men I know.
Even though underneath we know there's this gritty, driven, greedy man.
I have a competition in me. I want no one else to succeed.
And he really is able to hold a film together. He is the glue, and Daniel Day-Lewis is able to play a character with a lot of anger and a lot of drive and frustration, and still keep him sympathetic, still keep him humorous, and keep you wanting more, even though the film runs nearly 3 hours and mostly revolves around him. What ends up happening is Daniel Plainview, or Daniel Day-Lewis, sets his sights on a bit of land that hasn't been drilled, and a young man comes to him named Paul, coincidentally played by Paul Dano, and Paul tells him that there's oil under the land on his father's farm. And so Daniel takes his young son, H.W.
This is my son and my partner, H.W. Plainview.
and tells the man he's hunting quail, and what he's really doing is searching for oil on the land. And eventually he finds the land and buys the man out from his property without fully disclosing the fact that he plans to drill on his land and become very wealthy off of it. There's a moment where he says to his son that we're not going to give him oil prices, we're going to give him quail prices. And, uses his charm and his manipulation to undersell this poor farmer. And Paul's brother, Eli, who is also played by Paul Dano in an interesting turn of character. I did find this maybe a bit confusing the first time I watched the film. Granted, I watched the film for the first time when I was in middle school, when it came out in theaters. It was a completely captivating experience, but I do remember having a bit of a weird moment going, oh, that's also the brother of that same character because it's played by the same actor. Either way, you eventually move on from that, and Eli becomes the central antagonist of the film. I will say that Daniel is a bit of an anti-hero, and I do kind of think of him as our protagonist, but also as an antagonist in many ways. And he even is his own antagonist through his greed and selfishness throughout this film. But if there is a true antagonist in this movie, it is Paul Dano as Eli. And Eli has dreams of becoming a servant of God and a preacher and leading this town and his community in the eyes of God. And he is challenging this greed and this selfishness that Daniel emits. And this is where this really cool dynamic comes in between this film and is the catalyst for so much of the plot and so much of what drives your interest in this movie is their contrast in ideals. The interesting thing that we find throughout the film and in learning more about these characters is that Eli and Daniel, even though they have different ideologies, they seem to be going about things in a similar manner. Eli is often using his church as a front for his own gain and, is trying to rise in the ranks and create a larger denomination. And this actually mirrors what Daniel Day-Lewis is doing with his oil business. And he's manipulating these people of the town, and Eli is even manipulating them with his own charms and, his very larger than life and exaggerative sermons that we know are completely genuine. And so there's some comedy in seeing these two characters who are putting on a front of being for the benefit of others and yet are out for their own gain. And there's some really fantastic scenes between them. They go from using words against each other to physical violence.
When do we get our money, Daniel?
To, these moments in the community where they're completely rivaling each other. And I just love their dynamic in this film. And there's moments where each one has to bend to give to the other because they know that without Daniel, there wouldn't be as large of a congregation for Eli to preach to, and without Eli, Daniel wouldn't have the land to drill on. So they need each other.
You owe the Church of the Third Revelation $5,000. Want to feel right for the subway?
And H.W. is also a fascinating character, Daniel's son. And he is, learning from his father and gaining a lot. And he also has some turning point in the film. And I'm not going to give away too much or talk about what happens with everybody, but he becomes his own person and also becomes a challenger of Daniel's. The film's ideals of greed and of selfishness are the things that stand out to me the most and will be the things that are what makes this film so timeless. Another fantastic element to the film is the score. The score was done by Radiohead's guitarist Johnny Greenwood, who has done a number of the scores for Paul Thomas Anderson. And I have heard that, and you can hear it in the score, they used the influence of Polish composer Krzysztof Penderecki in assembling this score. And it really adds this eerie tension to the score. Penderecki's music has been used in tons of films, particularly and most notably The Shining, the horrifying choral music that's heard, especially throughout the ending. Also, David Lynch has used his music. He has a terrifying at times way of putting an orchestration together. And I think the influence really adds to the dark underside of Daniel's mind and the greed that's going on within him. Also, the cinematography is completely breathtaking in this film. There's a few montages of the people working on the oil derricks and the vast open fields that are shot like nothing I've ever seen before or since. And I do think this is one of the finest films of probably the last 20 plus years. And coincidentally, it came out the same year as another really fantastic film of the era, and that's No Country for Old Men. And they were actually shot close to each other. And No Country for Old Men beat this film at the Oscars for Best Picture, but Daniel Day-Lewis was able to win Best Actor, and the film did win for Best Cinematography, which I think it's so deserving of. I think this is one of the finer films and examples in Paul Thomas Anderson's array of films, but he's done incredible work, and I think every one of his movies is a masterpiece, and you are able to gain so much from them, and they're all very, very different. And this definitely marks a turning point for Paul Thomas Anderson. He took about a 5-year break before making this film. The film he made previously was 2002's Punch Drunk Love, which is a pretty much dark comedy. And, you know, it's a shorter, modern piece, excuse me, and this is a wildly different thing. And the film that followed this was The Master, which, not that they're the same thing, but that he kind of kept his style from this film a bit in The Master. It's a period piece, character study, two people, there's religion involved and greed. And I think that this era of his filmmaking, particularly this film and The Master, are just really incredible works of cinema, and I think anybody should check it out. Thank you.
That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Our